one of the best pieces of advice I ever got was actually one of my first ever encounters with any kind of life coaching.
Mm.
And he said, and this is in relation to job interviews, and people, when it comes to a job interview, they see the status of the job and they automatically place themselves below that status in the hierarchy. So that's the worst thing you can do. You are lowering yourself. You are devaluing and debasing yourself before you've even gone for the job interview. Approach every job interview like a conversation with a friend or with a business colleague or someone that an acquaintance that you know well, and talk to them as equals.
Adam Taylor is a psychology graduate, a life coach, an educator. He's also the founder of lifehubcoaching.com. He works with clients in all aspects of life, in professional circles, in the corporate world. He works with athletes, people who are navigating significant change in their life. I found some of his insights and his ideas really, really useful and really inspiring. And I hope that you will too. A big shout out, a big thanks to everybody that has subscribed so far. I really appreciate it. Those that haven't, if you find this content useful, helpful in any way, feel free to like, comment, share, subscribe. Really appreciate that, and it really helps the channel grow. Thank you very much. Adam Taylor, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Tell me, what does a life coach do?
So a life coach is a professional that has a set of skills, a toolkit that's designed to help people change their lives in a way that individual wants. So a life coach will guide a person through transitionary period in their life, or even a stagnant period of their life, in a way that the individual wants. So it's very non-directive approach. You could say that potentially a life coach, say in the media, is like almost seen as a guru. That's absolutely not what a life coach should be. A life coach is there as someone to guide and to point in the right direction. And they're trained to do that. They're not trained to give advice.
And what kind of qualifications, if I wanted to become a life coach tomorrow, where would I go? What would I do?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of people out there with lots of qualifications. The gold standard, the industry standard, would be getting an International Coaching Federation accredited qualification. So there's a number of institutes across Ireland that do them. I got mine through the Irish Life Coach Institute. But the whole idea is that you go through that rigorous process to make sure that you're qualified. So it's not that easy. It's in a way, it's a bit like psychotherapy, where you have to get a certain number of hours before you can call yourself a life coach. Yeah.
Why did you decide to become a life coach? What was it about the profession that attracted you?
Well, I'm some of my qualifications are in psychology. So I've got qualifications in education and bachelor's in psychology, and I'm particularly interested in the relatively new field of positive psychology. And what I mean by positive psychology is that historically you go to see a psychologist when you're in the doldrums, the whole, the Freudian term of psychosis and all of that. You're very mentally unwell. So that the field of positive psychology and related is performance psychology is looking at how can we get the best out of people? How can we take someone that's mentally well and raise the bar for them? And when I read about life coaching and went to a life coach myself, I thought this is very much aligned to me.
What kind of people are looking or are needing life coach? Who are your clients?
Well, it really could be anyone. So again, that change piece is so important. People that where change might have come upon them,
Mm,
or they are looking for change in their lives when they know something's not right.
mm,
And that can be absolutely anyone. So generally, it's professionals in that kind of 25 to 55 age bracket. So fairly even across the genders. And they're there for a range of issues within their life, whether it's someone wanted to make a decision if they wanted to go into fostering people.
mm,
It might be someone looking to retire, and figuring out, is this something that is genuinely something they want to do? So a lot of life coaches actually look for a niche.
mm.
So you get generalists, or you can get life coach with a niche. So, for example, I'm looking at doing an addiction coaching qualification, and extra training because it fits in my field of career at the minute. Others might look at something like executive coaching, where they're looking at business and looking at those high power people at the top. So it really it depends. There's hundreds of life coaches across Ireland now. It's there's an industry really grown in the last 10 years, particularly through the pandemic and coronavirus.
Mm.
But if you're looking for a life coach, it's that ICF qualification that you're looking for first and foremost. If you found someone with that, then you're going in the right direction.
Okay, so ICF qualification. What stops people from arriving at a conclusion or a decision or deciding upon the change themselves? What do you think is inhibiting them discovering this new direction for themselves, where they feel they have to reach out and get help?
Yeah. So very often people will have what's called unconscious incompetence. So there is a psychological theory, and it's summarized as the Johari window. So a box window, a bit like the shelf behind me. So on one side, you've got what you're consciously aware of, and on the other side, you've got what you're unconsciously aware of.
Mm,
And then below that, what you're competent at and uncompetent at. So people would come to me when they're aware of something going on for them, but they can't quite figure out what it is. Um, for example, I've worked with a lot of athletes, and a few musicians as well, and those professions tend to be short-term contracts and very short career spans. So you get people when they're young in their 30s and they're faced with, do I finish this career and find a stable career, or do I go on for another couple of years and try and make this work? And so that would be an example of someone that they're aware that there's something within them, but they need to explore it with someone.
mm. And when you say you're working with a musician or an athlete, you're talking about somebody potentially giving up their dream.
Exactly, yeah, very very much so. Like, and the number of high profile footballers, for example, that have fallen off the wagon once they've retired. You know, Paul Gascoigne springs to mind, or Diego Maradona. These are people that were at the elite of their profession. Their whole identity evolved around what they could do for 90 minutes on a football pitch with a football. And all of a sudden they're getting injuries, they've lost a yard of pace, that they can't keep up with the young lads that are now out competing them, and so they're left with this identity crisis. And what do they do? That they traditionally have filled that with some kind of addiction, something that will give them that euphoria of playing their dream. Different for musicians. It might be, most good musicians, once they're competent, they can play for the whole lives. You're just talking scale. But it really is the athletes that I've seen that have struggled with dealing with an end of a career that they're highly skilled at and having relatively few transferable skills.
You think of people like Kenny Sampson, for example, who's photographed on park benches. You think of Paul McGrath and his struggles.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Part of it could be the age at which they go into the industry, that they don't have life skills. They're not taught life skills. They don't have third level education. And then they go in and then they're at the end of their career. So what would be the difference between, say, a life coach when you make an intervention and a psychotherapist or a counselor?
That's a great question. That's a great question. It's a matter of time. So a psychotherapist focuses on the past. They look at trauma. They look at historic events that are affecting the person today. A life coach deals with today. So what is affecting you right now? There is a slight crossover in that sometimes the past can present itself in the future. So, for example, bullying might be a good example of that. Workplace bullying. Someone was bullied as a child. They went through it. They didn't really resolve the trauma that occurred to them. And then 25 years later, they meet a similar personality that's up to the same tricks. And so that can bring up, it can bring a presenting trauma. And so you can work through a life coach to resolve that. So it really is a difference of time.
You say you work a lot with you work a lot with people, say, in the professionals in the corporate industry, the tech industry, etc. You may be aware, obviously, right now there's a lot of disruption in the industry, particularly in Ireland. There's a lot of redundancies. People are being laid off. There's a downturn in the economy. If you were working with them, would you be helping guide them into a new role? Would you be giving them career guidance advice? Like, what does that look like?
So it's about helping the person make their own informed choices. So life coaches always use the metaphor. I'm going to use it now. When a life coach works with a client, it's like we're driving a car. The life coach has the map, but the client has the wheel, the accelerator, the brakes, and all the rest of it. Life coach can make suggestions. Life coach can ask questions. Maybe you want to go this direction. Maybe you want to go that direction. Maybe you want to do a 180 and go back the way you came. It's the client that's in control. So it's the life coach's job to ask those questions that another person wouldn't maybe think to ask, to help a person realize or actualize their thoughts and then their dreams and hopes following that. So the tagline for my business, which is Life Hub Coaching, a quick tag, lifehubcoaching.com, if you want to check my website out. There's 3 steps the way I work, 3 steps. There's there's discovering, defining, and then performing. So in the coaching journey, you're doing these 3 things. So in the beginning, you're bringing all of the thoughts and feelings that are unconscious into the conscious. And that can be very challenging for people. So, and you mentioned, you asked me earlier, what prevents people from making these decisions is normally themselves. It's their own internal struggles and battles and their own personal history that they're kind of contending with. And the life coach will help them to see past those barriers, and help them to see possibilities. So once we've done that, we can then start defining the path we're going to take, or should I say the client will take. So we'll bring in like what resources are available, who can support you, is there any gaps that you need to fill, is there, is it a financial thing that you need to sort out? Define all of those elements, and then the most important piece is performing. So not just talking about it, but then actually going and doing it. And that starts on session 1. We don't fool around. We don't wait until session 6. No, you need to start acting on what you're discovering about yourself now. Otherwise, otherwise you're putting off what's good for you.
Well, they say action is the antidote to anxiety, right?
Absolutely.
So would you say that people, when they're coming to a life coach, I mean, obviously they're experiencing a lot of anxiety, they're anticipating change, and anxiety would be something they present with. It must be something they present with, because they have anxiety about even making a decision about where they go, and they have a lot of confusion. How would you work with somebody then to, would you try and help them with, say, mindfulness or relaxation or meditation or stuff like that? Would that be in your kind of arsenal?
Yeah, very much so. It's definitely within the repertoire. So mindfulness. So being a life coach is trying to get people into the present. So anxiety is about overthinking about the future. Anyone that's anxious is worried about what might happen. So you can't make a decision when you're thinking in those terms. You have to make a decision based on the present, what's happening right now. And so mindfulness, meditation, they're great ways of doing that. Sometimes just what's called a powerful question that really hits the nail on the head and can change someone's mindset, can do that. So yeah, to answer your question, that there's a number of tools that we can use. Visualization is often very powerful as well.
So there's an aspect of it then that you're talking about helping people to design their life, right? Their future life, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And you would be visualizing and working with them to try and to visualize that actual future life, and give them processes and ideas and steps, and show them steps to take to get there. So say, for example, I am in the tech industry. I'm working for Microsoft or Salesforce or one of the companies that is doing layoffs right now. And I present to you, and I would explain to you, okay, I've been laid off, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I'm looking to make a change in my life. What kind of time frame are you talking about? How quickly can you help people come to a decision? Are you talking 2 months, a week, 6 months? What's the time frame look like?
That really depends on the individual. So if you are action oriented, then it could be within a couple of weeks. If you're someone that needs to really process and feel and emote, then 6-10 sessions, maybe 12 sessions. It really does depend. It's a very individual process. So, but in the grand scheme of things, if it is going to take 12 weeks, 3 months, 1 quarter, it's not a huge amount of time.
Do you find people, when they present to you, right, they have beliefs about themselves, right, that are inhibiting them in terms of their growth, right? So they might believe that they're no good, they're not, the redundancy or whatever has a massive impact on their self-confidence. You see that a lot?
I'll give you an example of something, of the unconscious becoming conscious for someone. I was working with someone in the equestrian world, and she became injured and had to leave that industry, and because of dangerous working practices, went to then sue her former employer. So we were working on this, and she had crippling anxiety about this case. And we were talking for 4 or 5 weeks about not so much about the case, but about what she can do to be herself again. And after 4 or 5 sessions, it was like a light switch. Something went from unconscious to conscious. She was talking about how she doesn't feel physically herself anymore, and how that translated into the mental, and then it clicked. So the presenting past came up. So she was someone that always had crooked teeth and problems with her teeth and her jaw. And it was like a light switch came on, and so the whole session became about her teeth, which kind of sounds a bit, I don't know, maybe it's a bit small in light of everything that's going on for her, but to her it was the most important thing. I'm going to go get my teeth fixed. I'm going to go get pearly whites, straight as an arrow, and that will help me with the case.
Did it?
It did. Well, in terms of the case, it helped her with her mindset towards the case. She was able to present herself confidently as a result.
Yeah.
And therefore think positively about the case.
Yeah, that makes absolute perfect sense. And I can understand why.
Yes.
Because this is a lifelong something that had been buried, but obviously it had been upsetting for her.
Yeah.
And it had massively affected her confidence in everything she did in her life. And then she's facing this monumental case.
Battle. Yeah.
That's very interesting. So if you're working with somebody, right, say for example, how do you, what kind of challenge do you see the most that they have to overcome, right? Is it career? Is it mentality? Is it stuff that happened in the past? What challenges do they have to overcome? Do you see?
So very often, mentioned earlier, it's their own internal battles. So you're battling and we all do it, and I do it, and you probably do it, I assume. We're always on some level fighting with ourselves. So in terms of career, people, as you say, in tech are being laid off. Why are they in tech in the first place? What was motivating them to go in?
Well, that's a terrific question to ask.
Yeah. So I don't, maybe from your point of view, so what made you lean into going into the tech industry?
I felt that sales, my ability and experience in sales, would be a good fit for that industry.
Yeah.
I knew that it was the high status industry.
Okay.
That's number two. And number three, I knew there's a lot of opportunities in Dublin at that time. Right. So it was a confluence of a number of different things. And I'd worked in the travel industry previously. So I worked for a travel tech company. And I wanted to see a great global company from the inside.
I see. Yes. So they're all very healthy reasons to go in. The one that I found very interesting was the status. So how many people, and if you go back to the footballer, the musician, when they're at the elite, they're very high status, and the accolades to go with it. And it's the same for people climbing the corporate ladder. You make junior manager, area manager, director, and that's the trajectory that most people want to go. And very often, and it's the same across industries, people look for status, and most people now find their status in their career. Most people with good careers are providers too, so that whole provider aspect for your family, for whoever, is very important for people too. But it's the status that drives people. We are a hierarchy of a species. That's not that's without question. And people want to be as high up the hierarchy as possible. So if your whole identity revolves around your career, and all of a sudden the rug is pulled from underneath you, you're left on the floor with a sore ear. And that's very much what people that come to me that may lose their employment for a number of reasons. That's how they feel psychologically. They feel hurt.
Tell me about a growth mindset, right? So say, for example, somebody does actually they get made redundant and they lose their job. What's growth mindset, and what's the opposite of growth mindset?
Okay, so this is, I'd say probably 70% of the people I work with have a mindset problem, let's say. So let's start with a fixed mindset first. That's easy to define. A fixed mindset is learned. Growth mindset's learned in very early in a person's development. So a fixed mindset prevents people from accepting failure and learning from it. Someone with a fixed mindset, when they reach an impasse or a challenge that they can't on their own in that circumstance overcome, they hide and run away and say it's stupid and who could do that anyway, and it doesn't matter. And
so they blame external.
They externally blame. It's a reaction of frustration and anger. And anger is a secondary emotion. Anger always masks a more primary emotion, which is something like shame. So if you think every kid growing up, their least favorite subject is maths. So almost everyone I know has a very fixed mindset in relation to maths. Like algebra, who needs letters in numbers anyway? It's stupid. Whoever's going to use that? Well, actually, we use it all the time. We're not consciously doing algebra, but we actually are. When someone goes shopping and they're looking at discounts, you're doing the maths in your head, whether you realize it or not. But people have a fixed mindset in relation to it and say, I'm rubbish at maths. Maths just isn't for me. Okay, so let's take someone with a growth mindset. They, in their development, they might start doing something like they'll do their times tables, and they might get their 3, 5, 7, and 9 times tables perfect. But the 8 times tables just can't get it. Instead of getting frustrated and angry, someone with a growth mindset will see it as an opportunity to learn a new skill and therefore grow. Okay. So look, maths is a really easy one that we can all relate to on some level, I'm sure. But if you bring that into, bring that into the adult world, and these small problems can become big problems. So if we go back into the world of athletics, you take someone like a marathon runner, which is very, very psychologically demanding. And they're always coming second place to someone else. Then you can understand how a fixed mindset can affect someone. I'll give you a better example. So I've recently been working with someone in classical music, and they told me the story, and this is common, I believe, in classical music. The way classical music is taught with a fixed mindset. So the person described to me how all the way through their childhood, they were never good enough. Even though that they passed all their auditions, they were winning their competitions, they were performing in orchestras, they got into the top university in Europe. And yet nothing was ever good enough. Well, if that's the message you're only ever getting, you're going to internalize that. So when it comes to performing or competing, your mindset is going to be more if something goes wrong, if I make the smallest of mistakes, well, that means I'm a failure. You know, if I hit one note wrong out of 1,000, I've failed. And so people with a fixed mindset will seek perfection when perfection does not exist. Someone with a growth mindset will recognize that they played a note wrong, brush it off and go, okay, so next time I'll focus on that piece of the music and make sure I'm concentrating when I play that note. So that's the biggest difference. You can see growth mindset all across athletics. So the top tennis players, Djokovic, Federer, to a lesser extent, Andy Murray, they're all growth mindset. They do not let defeat stop them from winning the next tournament. They don't internalize a defeat, and they don't take defeat as an intrinsic value statement on themselves. They say, okay, I was beaten on the day. Okay, let's review the tape and let's see where I went wrong. So next time I'm playing that guy, I'm going to beat him.
Yeah, and there's a very important thing you mentioned there as well about, so say when you do experience a defeat, say when
Yes.
you do experience a knock, that you don't go, oh, well, you know what, yeah, I was never going to win anyway. And the other person, they were always going to win. They were always better, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That fixed mindset in life, in everything, can really be inhibiting, right?
Yes.
It can inhibit everything, but it sounds like it's coming from childhood experience and childhood trauma. Do you have strategies like to move people from fixed mindset to growth mindset? Is there a way of doing that, a technique that you deploy to do that?
Most people with a fixed mindset are unaware they have a fixed mindset about something. And the biggest myth, by the way, in terms of mindset, is that you are either fixed or growth. That couldn't be further from the truth. We are all growth mindset in some area of our lives, and we're all fixed mindset in some area of our excuse me, we're all fixed in some area of our lives.
Do you, out of curiosity, do you encounter a lot of people in life that are carrying regret? Right. So does that affect decision making? Do you know?
I suppose in my experience, people that don't have regrets are in denial about the regrets they have. So if you go back to the fixed mindset piece, people need to feel perfect in order to feel happy, and which can engender a huge amount of denial. And so if people have regrets, you need to grieve that. So it's a process of grief. And so going through the 5 stages of grief, you can start with denial, but you've very quickly got to get to acceptance. And the route people take on that journey is different. You can skip a stage, you can be in denial for a very long time, and then you go through the anger phase and then quickly to acceptance, or it could be for months. But it's very much a process of uncovering the unconscious thoughts and feelings, using that toolkit that I mentioned in the beginning that most qualified coaches have. The most important element from a coaching point of view is actively listening. So people that talk for a living are very, very good at talking, not always good at listening. Listening with empathy, listening with no bias and no subconscious transference of values from yourself onto someone else. If someone is regretting something, they need to feel absolutely confident in the person they're disclosing to, because it's actually grief that they're talking about. They're grieving what could have been. And so these are very fundamental skills that it's not just life coaches, it's all kinds of professionals have in the psychological field. So it's fundamental to coaching, is that you explore these things.
Yeah, I have come across that before, where they talk about regret and acceptance, and accepting yourself and forgiving yourself is at the heart of overcoming regret.
Yeah.
But I guess as we get older and we mature, we accumulate and acquire regret in our lives, and dispensing with it is very, very important.
Yeah.
So is it important for a life coach, right, to have personal experience of, so say somebody comes to you, like you've worked with, say, sports people and equestrian people and people in the corporate world. How important is your personal experience?
That's a great question as well. Do you need it? You don't necessarily need life experience to be a good life coach. If you can learn the toolkit, and if you get enough practice, so long as you're not doling out advice and pretending to be something you're not, so long as you're being an authentic, genuine person in your career, then you don't necessarily need life experience. Now, I would say, in my own opinion, that life experience is hugely important, because we talk about regret and forgiving yourself in order to overcome that grief from the regret. If you can learn to do that yourself, then you can help other people through that process. There's no question. So from my own point of view, I've experienced childhood bereavement, say, and so I've used that life experience of many years now of talking therapy and coaching, and I bring that experience to my clients. And it doesn't have to be bereavement, it can be anything. So I didn't really, I was a bit of a politician's answer, I think.
Well, bereavement can be applied to everything. I mean, when somebody loses their job, you can there's a similar road that a person has to travel.
Yes.
So you have to go through the different stages of grief. There are lots of different coaching methods and styles. How would you describe your coaching style? Do you have a style? Is it something you've thought about?
Yeah, so probably the most famous coach is Tony Robbins. So he's got that bombastic nature, right? He's got that real kind of go get 'em, you can do this kind of very, I want to say, American approach, and it's worked for him. He's been genuine and authentic. That's who he is. I am much more, well, first of all, I want to integrate it with more different types of psychological intervention. So I will make sure a person is relaxed, comfortable, and empathetic. I will give them lots of space to explore. I go at their pace, don't force anything, and build a relationship over a number of sessions. Some are quicker than others. It depends on the individual. So my approach is very much more looking at the emotions, getting into some of the nitty gritty, and slowly pushing people where they don't want to go, but they know they need to go.
Can you give me an example of that?
Yes. So I was working with a League of Ireland footballer, and he was approaching retirement, and so he had to try to come to terms with the fact that retirement was approaching, and regrets that he didn't do things differently to play in England and to play for Ireland, and the envy of watching people that he grew up with going on to do that. And so we worked on a number of things, but he realized that he had been held back through his career by crippling anxiety. And so we worked on mindset stuff. We worked on him coming to terms with approaching a new career. And he transitioned very, very handily, then very easily into a new career. He's blossoming. He was, his relationships improved because he was less anxious. And so by going into the Johari window, bringing the unconscious into the conscious and understanding where those incompetencies were that we can improve on. A huge amount of it was processing emotions in order to communicate his wants and needs. And once he was able to do that in his life and career, the anxiety became easier. It became manageable.
If you were working with somebody right now, going back to the corporate world, right, who has faced redundancy, what would your advice be to them in terms of handling that shock, in terms of handling the I suppose the life altering change that they're facing? What would you say to them?
I think when people are faced with that kind of change, people look for control. They need to control their reality. So you can't control what is uncontrollable. So find what you can control and really focus on that. So can you get an absolutely killer CV? Can you make 7 applications to new organizations? Can you do something that you've always wanted to now that you've never had the time for? So finding that control. So that's the first thing. The second thing I'd say is really look at how you identify yourself as a person. And you can write a list even, and it's a very simple task. Just write a list of everything that makes you you. If your career's in there, then you're not looking deep enough, because a person is so much more than just a career. So it's about bringing it away from that loss of status and that loss of power and you have the practical, the financial stuff as well. But look at your worth as a person and detach it from the event that's occurred. So those are 2 really important things, I think. And if you feel yourself struggling, seek help. That's it could be a life coach, it could be a friend, it could be a family, it could be anyone.
Yeah.
Talk about it.
Try as much as you can not to attach your identity and your self-worth
Yes.
to your job. I think it's a very, very important piece of advice.
Yeah.
Self-worth especially.
Yeah. One of the best pieces of advice I ever got was actually one of my first ever encounters with any kind of life coaching. And he said, and this is in relation to job interviews, and people, when it comes to a job interview, they see the status of the job and they automatically place themselves below that status in the hierarchy. So that's the worst thing you can do. You are lowering yourself. You are devaluing and debasing yourself before you've even gone for the job interview. Approach every job interview like a conversation with a friend or with a business colleague or someone that an acquaintance that you know well, and talk to them as equals. So when you get that job and you're in the job, you're working with your management and you're working with maybe people below you as well. you're talking to them in the same way as equals. And so when it comes to a point where you may be facing redundancy, or you may be facing a situation in that job that isn't satisfactory to you, that they may be trying to see you as less of an equal. Well, you're already of the mindset that, okay, you're breaking this contract that we made during the job interview. So now I'm going to seek employment elsewhere. And
that's very interesting.
You're taking the people out of it. You're saying, no, this was a business decision I made to enter a contract of employment with you. These are the terms that I expect. We can have unwritten terms as well through conversation during interview. If you break them, I'll find terms with another employer. But all the while, I am an equal to you. I'm a human being just like you.
That's very interesting, because I think in a corporate structure that is a hierarchical structure, and it's all status, and people have. Yeah. I know from working within the hierarchy that status is very, very important.
Yes.
To the people higher up the status food chain.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And there is a kind of almost Darwinian existential need to maintain that status hierarchy. Will Storr talks about this in the status game brilliantly. And I just wonder sometimes if a flatter structure across organizations would not just be a better way to do things, and would deliver more for everybody. I understand, like in an army, you need leaders, managers, troops, and people directing.
Yeah.
But
you mentioned the word leader. So in organizations, there's not enough leaders. So from that point of view, anyone can be a leader in a certain situation. So if you're the head of catering, then the head of finance has nothing to do with your field, even though he may in theory have a higher status. But it's the difference between a leader and a manager or a boss. A boss sees the hierarchy, and that's the paradigm that he works from. A leader sees people and treats them as people. So, and this is something I've always tried to do, is in anywhere I've worked, I will give as much time to the temp cleaner as I will to my manager and colleagues, because they're all valuable people. They're all performing a role that if they didn't do, the unit wouldn't function.
Well, it could be argued that the cleaner has probably one of the most important roles in the institution.
Exactly.
Because if the trash doesn't get taken out and the everything doesn't get cleaned, nobody's going to be able to do their work the next day.
Absolutely, yeah. If maintenance don't change the light bulbs, you're sitting. Excuse me. You're sitting in a dark office.
Yeah.
So everyone has a role to play. Everyone can lead in their own way. So in terms of flattening, humans need to operate in a hierarchy, but that doesn't mean that you can't create mini hierarchies within that. So and a leader at the very top needs to recognize this. They need to understand that you need to treat everyone as human beings, even at the very bottom, all the way to the top, because that's how you keep people happy. That's how you get buy-in. There's a real interesting. So there's a book by Carol Dweck called, and it's about growth and fixed mindset. So a leader has that very, very much that growth mindset, where he's not stifling ideas from within the hierarchy to make sure that he's the guy that's perfect and in perfect control and keeping everyone in line and in check. And he's the guy, he's the man. Those organizations always fail. And she uses the example of Xerox. back in the 80s was a failing organization. So she came in as an advisor and said, change the leadership structure. Brought in a new, and I can't remember her name off the top of my head, brought in a new leader, trained them with the growth mindset, and Xerox is now synonymous with, paper management, whatever you want to, printing and leafleting and all of that. So it's not so much about, from my point of view, flattening the hierarchy as creating leaders within the hierarchy.
Leaders as opposed to managers.
Yeah.
My concern, I personally think hierarchies are dangerous, right? And there's a great example. I think it was one of the Apollo missions. I actually learned about this from a Harvard professor who came into a technology company I worked at and told us this very famous story. It's a wonderful story, and it's about the I think it might have been the Apollo or the Challenger mission that they were working on in Cape Canaveral. The rocket took off. It reached close to orbit and then exploded. Everybody on that rocket died.
Yes.
What had happened was they had a very strange weather event the night before in Florida, and temperatures dropped below, I think, they were freezing temperatures. And of course, some of the nuts and bolts on the rocket had either expanded or changed and loosened, right? But nobody on the team had said anything about the possibility of this happening. But there was an engineer, a very, very junior engineer, who was aware that below a certain temperature, this nut or these bolts on this rocket would expand and potentially the whole thing would explode. But he kept his mouth shut.
Yeah.
Because he was afraid of his manager. And he felt that if he spoke to his manager, who was higher in the hierarchy, that he would get abuse or something over it. And he kept quiet.
Yes.
And the person that came into the technology company that I was working at explained, and really she felt that hierarchies themselves are inherently dangerous in all organizations because they inhibit communication. And particularly if you have a manager or a leader above you who wants to keep things quiet.
Yes.
Many people will do.
Yes. I mean, that's absolutely, that's a great point. Beware the tyrant, I suppose. There's other similar examples of hierarchies failing. I think that we cannot escape our biology. And in biological terms, we form some form of hierarchy, and history for thousands of years shows us that through, from the feudal age all the way up. So it's a flawed system. The question is, how do we make the best of it? So in that the story you're talking about, a culture of fear led to a absolute catastrophic disaster. But if that culture was different, maybe it would have been different.
Exactly. Adam Taylor, where can people find you? Where's your have you got a website or
so you can find me at lifehubcoaching.com. You can find me on Instagram at lifehubcoaching. And I'm on LinkedIn. You can find me on LinkedIn. That's a real good way to communicate with me, actually. I'm quite active on that one. And Adam Taylor, I can send you the link.
I'll stick the link in the description box. Adam Taylor, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure and very, very interesting. Thank you.
Pleasure talking to you. Thanks, Mel.